Imagine if I told you that a man's real emotions are rarely revealed through big romantic gestures or constant compliments, but through one quiet, almost unnoticeable behavior that most women tend to overlook. Once you learn how to recognize it, all the confusion, mixed signals, and overthinking start to fade, and you finally begin to understand how he truly feels. The issue is that many women focus on the wrong signs, replaying messages, counting calls, or waiting for clear verbal confirmation. But the reality is that men often express their feelings more through their body than their words. It's a subtle shift in posture, attention, and presence that naturally appears when they're around someone they genuinely like. He isn't aware of it and he isn't trying to show it, but it reveals everything. When you understand this, the whole picture becomes much clearer. Before we go deeper into that exact sign, pause for a moment. If you've ever felt unsure about whether a guy actually likes you or not, you can like this, so more people dealing with the same confusion can find it too. A lot of women have experienced being around a man who feels interested one second and distant the next, leaving them questioning what is really going on. Is he simply friendly by nature, or is there something more behind his behavior? The truth is, men and women often express interest in completely different ways. Women usually rely on words and direct communication, while men tend to show attraction through quiet physical signals. If you only focus on what he says, you can easily miss what he is already showing through his actions. What most people don't realize is that a man's attraction often appears in small physical changes rather than spoken language. The way he positions himself, where his attention naturally goes, and the unconscious adjustments he makes around you can say far more than anything he actually says. Many women miss these signals because they are conditioned to listen for verbal proof instead of observing behavior. So even when a man is clearly interested, his actions can easily be mistaken for friendliness. This is where most misunderstandings begin. You may remember moments where he laughed, stayed engaged, and seemed fully present, yet you still walked away unsure of his intentions. The truth is, his body may have already been expressing interest the entire time. Some women naturally seem to understand when a man is interested, while others, no matter how observant they are, still feel uncertain about where they stand. It isn't a special ability or luck, it simply comes down to what they notice. The common mistake is assuming men show attraction the same way women do. They don't. Men are far more likely to express feelings through physical behavior than clear words. Because of that, a man can be genuinely interested but still appear neutral if you're only paying attention to his speech. That's why confusion happens so often. What feels unclear is usually just unrecognized signals being missed. Let's start from here. Have you ever noticed how some women can instantly sense a man's interest, while others feel completely lost, even when the signs are obvious? It's not intuition or mystery, it's awareness. The difference is simply what they focus on. Many people believe attraction is shown through compliments or direct statements, but that's not usually how it works. Men often communicate interest in subtle physical ways that are easy to miss if you're only listening to words. That's why a man can seem engaged, kind, and even playful, yet still leave you confused about how he actually feels. The misunderstanding comes not from a lack of signals, but from not recognizing the right kind of signals. Think about a situation where you meet a guy who seems genuinely interested. He laughs at your jokes, asks about your life, and stays fully engaged in the conversation. Everything feels encouraging in the moment, and you leave thinking there could be something there. But later, doubt starts to creep in. You begin questioning whether he was just being polite or naturally friendly. You replay everything in your mind, trying to find hidden meanings in his words. What most women don't realize is that the real answer was never just in what he said. It was also in how he behaved, his body language, his focus, and how he positioned himself around you. The key takeaway is simple. Understanding men isn't about guessing or overanalyzing every message they send. It's about learning to notice the physical patterns that reveal what they actually feel. Once you start paying attention to that, the confusion begins to disappear and clarity takes its place. A man's body often expresses truth before his words ever catch up. And when you learn to recognize those subtle signals, everything becomes easier to understand. What once felt uncertain starts to make sense, and you no longer rely on guessing, you respond to what is actually being shown. That shift changes the way you see attraction completely. Understanding this one subtle behavior changes everything. It gives you clarity in a space that usually feels confusing and full of doubt. Instead of wondering what he might be feeling or trying to decode mixed signals, you start seeing something far more reliable. You stop relying on hope, fear, or imagination and begin noticing what is actually in front of you. That constant mental loop of overthinking texts, replaying conversations, and searching for hidden meaning starts to quiet down. In its place comes a kind of calm certainty. You're no longer trying to convince yourself of something or question every interaction. You're simply observing. And that shift alone is powerful because it removes you from guessing games and puts you in a place where you can recognize genuine interest with far less effort and far more confidence. Most of the confusion women feel comes from focusing on the wrong signals. Texting patterns, reply speed, emojis, and message length are all things people tend to overanalyze, even though they rarely reflect real emotional depth. The same goes for how often he reaches out or how many calls he makes. These behaviors can be influenced by personality, routine, or even convenience, not just attraction. Even words themselves are not always reliable, because someone can say all the right things without truly meaning them, or struggle to express themselves while still feeling a lot. Eye contact is often misread too, since it can simply reflect confidence or social habit. When you rely on these surface-level clues, it becomes easy to misunderstand what is really happening, because none of them consistently reveal true interest on their own. The real shift happens when you move your attention away from words and isolated actions and start observing physical alignment. When a man is genuinely drawn to someone, his body naturally begins to orient toward her. It's not forced or planned, it happens without conscious thought. His shoulders, chest, and feet gradually turn in your direction, as if his entire presence is leaning into the moment with you. Even when he is standing or sitting casually, his physical position tends to stay directed toward you instead of drifting away. This full-body orientation is different from polite attention, where only the face engages while the rest of the body remains loosely angled elsewhere. The difference is subtle but important, because the body reveals level of interest in a way words often don't. When a man is simply being friendly, his attention is divided. He might look at you, smile, and respond appropriately, but his body remains open to the environment around him, ready to shift elsewhere. There is no strong physical commitment to the interaction, but when genuine interest is present, his entire posture changes. He doesn't just acknowledge you, he positions himself toward you. That physical alignment reflects focus, comfort, and emotional engagement all at once. The important thing to understand is that this is not a calculated gesture. It is an unconscious response to attraction. His body reacts before he has time to filter or control it, and that is what makes it so revealing. Because while words can be shaped and controlled, the body often speaks first and more honestly than anything else. He can stay calm in his messages. He can even control his facial expressions, but his body rarely lies. What he truly feels tends to show up in the way he positions himself around you, and when you notice his whole body consistently turning toward you and staying there, you're not dealing with guesswork anymore. You're seeing something much more direct. There's no decoding, no second guessing, no searching for hidden meaning in every word. His physical focus becomes the clearest signal that his attention is real. That's why this simple shift in posture matters so much. It strips away the noise and shows you where his interest actually is, not what you hope it is or fear it might not be. And once you recognize that pattern, things that used to feel confusing start to feel much more straightforward and easier to read. What makes this even more revealing is that this posture rarely exists on its own. When a man is genuinely interested, his entire behavior tends to shift in a connected way. One of the clearest signs is how he manages distance. He naturally leans in a little when you speak, subtly closing the space between you without even thinking about it. It's not forced or dramatic, just a quiet tendency to be physically closer. Then there's his level of focus. A man who is truly engaged with you tends to become noticeably still. The distractions fade, his phone is forgotten, his attention stops wandering, and his energy feels directed toward the moment you're sharing. That contrast becomes obvious when you compare it to someone who is simply being polite, because polite attention still leaves room for distraction, while genuine interest tends to narrow his focus. Another detail often missed is how his hands behave. When interest is real, his body language tends to open up rather than close down. His gestures become more natural and expressive when he talks to you, and his hands are more likely to stay visible instead of hidden or restricted. This openness reflects comfort and engagement rather than distance. Alongside that, there is often a subtle mirroring effect. Without realizing it, he may begin to match your movements, adjusting his posture when you adjust yours or syncing small gestures during conversation. This kind of unconscious reflection usually appears when someone feels connected and attentive, not when they are indifferent. It's a quiet form of alignment that often goes unnoticed unless you're paying close attention. You can also observe how his attention shifts when other people enter the conversation. A man who is genuinely interested in you tends to keep you as his main point of focus, even in group settings. While he may acknowledge others out of social awareness, his body orientation and attention often still return to you. That consistency is important because it shows where his primary interest naturally sits. When you put all of these behaviors together, orientation, leaning in, focus, openness, mirroring, and attention consistency, you start to see a pattern rather than isolated actions. And that pattern is what reveals real interest in a much clearer way than words alone ever could. But there's something just as important to understand. Not every instance of these behaviors means romantic interest. Some people are naturally attentive, expressive, or socially engaged, and they may display similar body language with everyone they interact with. That's why context matters. The real distinction comes from consistency and specificity. If this level of focus and physical orientation shows up repeatedly and more strongly with you than with others, it carries more meaning. If it appears everywhere, it may simply be part of his personality. Understanding that difference prevents misreading friendliness as attraction or overlooking genuine interest when it is actually there. And once you can recognize these patterns clearly, something changes in how you respond. You stop getting lost in overthinking every interaction or trying to force meaning from small signals. Instead, you start observing behavior as a whole. But this is also where many people make mistakes. Some overinterpret early signs and become overly invested too quickly, while others doubt what they see and dismiss real interest altogether. Finding balance is key. Not rushing ahead, not holding back out of fear, and not turning every signal into a test. Real clarity comes from observing consistently rather than reacting emotionally to isolated moments. But when that level of focus is directed only toward you, that's where real clarity begins to show. In most cases, a man doesn't withdraw because his interest suddenly disappears. More often, he pulls back because something in the interaction made him feel uncertain or misread. It could be overthinking, testing behavior, or a lack of visible interest coming from the other side. The solution isn't to chase harder or try to force clarity. It's to stay steady, open, warm, and confident in yourself without becoming dependent on his response. When a man senses that you notice his interest but aren't desperate for it, that you appreciate his attention but don't rely on it for validation, something shifts in him. He feels more at ease. He feels he can express himself without pressure, and that sense of emotional safety often encourages him to stay engaged rather than withdraw. When you avoid common mistakes like overanalyzing, testing, or reacting too strongly, you create space for something more natural to develop. The connection stops feeling like a guessing game and starts becoming a two-way experience where both people can show up without pressure. There's less confusion, less tension, and more room for genuine interaction to grow. From there, the focus shifts from decoding signals to simply observing how things unfold between you. And that's where things become healthier and more stable, because neither person feels forced into a role or constantly evaluated. The deeper point is that attention alone isn't what keeps a man interested. Interest grows in environments that feel emotionally comfortable and easy to exist in. When someone feels relaxed around you, when there's no constant pressure to perform or prove something, they tend to stay more naturally engaged. That doesn't come from perfection, but from emotional ease. At the same time, maintaining your own life is essential. One of the quickest ways attraction fades is when everything else gets dropped the moment someone shows interest. When your routines, friendships, and personal goals disappear into the relationship, the dynamic changes. What once felt balanced starts to feel centered entirely around one person, which can reduce the sense of individuality that initially created attraction. Another important element is space. Healthy attraction doesn't thrive in constant closeness without pause. Some distance allows anticipation and appreciation to develop naturally. When someone has room to miss you, think about you, and return to the interaction on their own terms, the connection often strengthens. Alongside that is emotional stability. Being able to stay grounded when communication shifts or when someone becomes momentarily distant is important. Not every change in behavior carries meaning. Sometimes it's just life, stress, or distraction. Responding with calm instead of assumption helps prevent unnecessary tension and builds trust over time. Beyond all of that, shared experiences play a major role in deepening connection. Attraction becomes more meaningful when it moves beyond surface-level interaction into real moments shared together, conversations that feel honest, laughter that happens naturally, and experiences that create memories all contribute to a stronger bond. Over time, those moments matter far more than early impressions or isolated signals. They create familiarity, comfort, and emotional connection that lasts longer than initial attraction alone. At the core of everything, keeping someone interested is not about control, strategy, or becoming someone else. It's about creating an environment where both people feel comfortable being themselves. When there is ease instead of pressure, clarity instead of confusion, and authenticity instead of performance, connection has room to grow naturally. And in that space, interest doesn't need to be forced or questioned. It develops on its own, steadily and more genuinely over time. What really matters is remembering that none of these signs define your worth. Understanding body language or recognizing interest doesn't create attraction by itself. Confidence, self-respect, and emotional stability are what truly shape how you are experienced by others. When you are grounded in who you are, you naturally become clearer in your interactions and less affected by uncertainty. You stop trying to decode every moment and start observing relationships as they actually are. At the end of the day, the most important shift is this. You don't need to control feelings or force certainty. You just need to understand behavior without losing yourself in the process. When you see things clearly and stay true to yourself, confusion begins to fade, and what remains is a more grounded way of understanding connection. In the end, what all of this really comes down to is clarity, learning how to step out of confusion and into awareness without losing yourself in the process. So many people get stuck not because because the signs aren't there, but because they're looking at everything through uncertainty, fear, or hope, instead of simply observing what's actually happening. When you understand that real interest is often shown through consistent behavior, not just words or moments taken out of context, you stop building entire stories in your mind based on fragments. You start seeing patterns instead of isolated actions, and that alone changes how you experience relationships. But clarity isn't just about reading someone else correctly. It's also about staying grounded in yourself while you do it. Because even if someone shows interest, even if the signs are strong, none of it means anything if you lose your own center in the process. The healthiest connections don't come from chasing certainty or trying to decode every move. They come from being steady enough to observe without panic and open enough to respond without pressure. When you are secure in your own value, you don't need constant reassurance to feel okay. You can recognize interest without becoming dependent on it, and you can also recognize distance without instantly assuming the worst. That balance is what creates emotional strength. Not overanalyzing every detail, not ignoring your intuition, but learning to stay calm in the middle of uncertainty. Because the truth is, not every shift in behavior is meaningful, and not every moment of attention guarantees something deeper. People are complex. They have moods, distractions, habits, and personal patterns that don't always revolve around you. When you stop taking everything personally, you free yourself from unnecessary stress and start responding to reality instead of assumptions. At the same time, real connection is never built on observation alone. It grows through experience, through shared time, honest communication, comfort, and mutual effort. The signs may help you understand interest, but they are not the foundation of something lasting. What actually builds a meaningful connection is how two people treat each other over time, how they show up when things are easy and when things are not, and whether there is genuine respect underneath the attraction. And this is where everything becomes simpler. When someone is truly interested, you don't have to force it, chase it, or constantly question it. It reveals itself naturally over time, and when it's not there, no amount of analyzing will create it. That understanding removes a lot of emotional weight. It helps you stop trying to control outcomes and start paying attention to what is actually being reflected back to you. So the real conclusion is this: awareness is powerful, but only when it's paired with self-respect. Seeing someone clearly is important, but seeing yourself clearly matters just as much. You are not meant to lose yourself in decoding someone else's behavior. You are meant to stay rooted in your own value while you observe what unfolds. When you do that, relationships stop feeling like confusion and start feeling like clarity. And from that place, you don't just understand others better, you understand yourself better too.